Good morning, I'm Curt Myrie. I'm one of the docents here at the Valiant Air Command Warbird Museum in Titusville, Florida. We're located at the Space Coast Regional Airport just down the street from Kennedy Space Center. We have a collection of about 50 warbirds from World War I to modern day. We have about a third of those are in flying condition. There's several that we fly pretty regularly. And we've got historic vehicles that have a Wildcat behind me. There's lots of those in museums, but several of them are very unique, and ours is very unique. The F-4F Wildcat, designed by Grumman in the 1930s. This would have been the frontline Navy fighter on U.S. aircraft carriers at the start of World War II. It's a very tough airplane. It was far outclassed by the Zeros in the Pacific War, but it's a very tough airplane. Matter of fact, the pilots would call Grumman the Iron Works because they made such tough airplanes. All their fighter planes are called after cats, and this is the first one called the Wildcat. The F-4F, when the war started, World War II started, Grumman couldn't make enough airplanes, and American industry got behind the war effort, and so this airplane was actually made at a Chevrolet plant. GM got into the game, so this is a Wildcat made by Chevrolet. It's called an FM-1. Parts are pretty interchangeable, but again, this would have been the frontline fighter at the start of World War II. So we know how you could make more airplanes. GM got in the game. About 8,000 of these were made during the war. But how do you make more pilots? We needed Navy pilots, and the Air Corps could make pilots any place. Take off and land from a road or a field. And the Navy taught pilots how to do that, but at the end of their training, they had to learn to land and take off from an aircraft carrier. And that's a very unique skill. So they would teach pilots how to fly, and then they would teach them how to fly their type, the type of airplane they're going to fly. This is a fighter plane. And then they would have to teach them how to land and take off from an aircraft carrier. And how do you do that? If you remember your history, in 1942, we only had one aircraft carrier left in the Pacific because the rest had been sunk or damaged so bad they were in dry dock. So you can't take your one aircraft carrier out of combat to train pilots. You can't send your pilots downrange to learn on the job. So what do? So you can see the panel here. There was a Navy officer stationed in Chicago on the Great Lakes, and he would look and see these beautiful ships here that were tourist boats that would tour the Great Lakes in style, high-class, gold-plated, luxury tourist boats. And they had side paddle wheels, and they'd have to shovel coal into the engines to get them to work, but that was the 30s and 40s. That was kind of the way things were. He convinced the Navy to buy two of them, and they cut the tops off and made aircraft carriers out of them. And they parked those in Chicago on Lake Michigan. A lot of people live in Chicago know that the Navy Pier is a tourist site on Lake Michigan in downtown Chicago. Why do they call it the Navy Pier? Well, we used to park aircraft carriers there during World War II. And the Navy trained about 17,000 pilots during the war right out of Chicago at the Glenview Naval Air Station. They'd learn to fly their type. And then on the final graduation day, they would fly out into Lake Michigan and find the boat, the ship, and they would land and take off 8 times. And if they could land and take off 8 times, then they could go to war. And they'd usually do that in one day. So this airplane we know was born at the Chevy factory in 1942, and it went right to Chicago, to Glenview, to the naval training site there, and participated in the training of young ensign pilots. And in late of 1943, a young ensign got this airplane and went out to Lake Michigan to get his 8. And he got 2, and on the 3rd takeoff, the engine quit, and this plane went in the water. He knew how to swim. He got rescued, got another Wildcat, got his 8, and went to war. But this aircraft sat on the bottom of Lake Michigan for 50 years. Navy divers on a salvage training mission found it 50 years later and salvaged it as part of their training mission. And then the Navy gave this to our restoration team here at the Valiant Air Command. We have a lot of dedicated volunteer restoration people that restored it. Took about 5 years to get it to this condition. When they brought it up off the bottom, it still had gas in the tanks, still had air in the tires. Tough airplane.